So before we start, please raise your hand if you have never heard of the shadow brokers. Just checking. Oh, we have 2 people here. Thanks all for coming. So before we start, let me introduce myself quickly. So we don't have much time, so I'm going to go really quick. So my new claim to fame is to have been called a fun guy by the shadow brokers recently. But more seriously, I mainly do reverse engineering, and I've been covering most of the leaks from the shadow brokers since last August. And if you're familiar with Twitter, you may already be following me over there. So, who are the shadow brokers? So, I have no idea, nobody knows, but what we know is they have an interesting sense of humor. So that's a response they gave when I was saying, oh, it seems like the shadow brokers seem to know a lot about you as a team. And then they were just playing on words, saying they were not Buddhist. But by next month, so it's going to be the first anniversary of the first dump from the shadow brokers. And since then, we have seen multiple theories around who they may be. Initially, people thought some server may have been hacked, and that's how those files would have been retrieved. Quickly, that theory did not make much sense given the fact that a lot of those dumps are unrelated, and then we started to see operational notes, including PowerPoints. Is this a group, they claim to be from their name, or is this a single individual? Well, it's really hard to say, but if you look at most of the blog posts they are writing, you would see that the actual nickname they use is always in one word, like an IRC nickname, rather than we are the shadow brokers. Well, one of the theory, maybe an angry insider, before they remove all their tweets, if you have been following them on Twitter, you probably have seen that they get quite angry at people quite often. So, Tim Shorrock highlighted last year, the intelligence community hires more than 40,000 contractors, which is pretty big. And if we look at what happened over the past years, well, the US government is having an insider problem. Now, it's becoming more and more common to hear about insiders. More recently, Reality Winner last year, Al Martin, and then some unnamed insiders who got arrested around the same time frame. So there is definitely a huge problem around that. That's why I personally think I would not be surprised if the source of those files would come from another contractor. So last year, before Al Martin got arrested, everybody was oh, post-Snowden, there is nowhere new insider would happen, and then since then we heard of at least 3 new insiders issue. So what's interesting with the shadow brokers is, unlike WikiLeaks or Edward Snowden, the whole modus operandi was very different. They initially arrived on the scene with that crazy auction of 1 million Bitcoin. Started to dump some files. The original email that was used on GitHub was discovered. Even the actual email address, which seemed quite random, was not really that random. You have to go faster. And they've been quite active on Twitter, and most recently they moved their blog to Steemit. So during that talk, I'm just going to give a general overview of what happened over the past 12 months, including a description of what they posted this morning when they published their new blog post for the August edition. So that's basically all the events we're going to be covering. So last year, back in August, they started with a lot of firewall exploits including FortiGate, the Cisco appliances, Juniper, and even like a Chinese firewall. So it made a lot of noise because it was the actual first time we would see tools used by an intelligence agency other than from a PowerPoint, which is what we have seen, for instance, with Vault 7. They mainly release like wiki files, PowerPoint files, same thing with Edward Snowden, because we know those contractors didn't have direct access to those tools. So they started with like 2 files, one teaser file, which was containing all those exploits, and then a much larger file, which remained unknown for like several months until they finally like dropped the password. So in the initial like teaser file, so those are like the exploits that were around. As you can see, the interesting ones are, and it's interesting, like one of the interesting part about it is like, it looks like each release is part of a story. To give enough time to people to actually analyze the tools until they release like information about some operations that happen. So whenever you read the operational notes, you actually know what tools have been using and the modus operandi from Equation Group. So the first one was mainly like firewalls. And a few weeks later, we heard that the FBI raided the home of a contractor called Harold Martin. We used to work for Booz Allen, so I don't know if we should say like the intelligence community has an insider problem or if Booz Allen is having an insider problem. But from the official report, they said he had terabytes of data containing like tools that he gathered, and even notes and data that he gathered for almost 20 years. 20 years. And God knows what happened to it. We keep hearing like so many weird stories about that story. And then, once summer was over, across September and October, we started to see more and more blog posts from these shadow brokers, where basically they started to tease people more. So they're trying to get media attention. They're like, hey guys, I'm here. Like, how come nobody's talking about it? Well, I'm gonna like reduce the price from 1 billion Bitcoin to like 10,000, and then I will release like the actual password. Then some like awkward blog post happened. Was like pretending to like post a conversation with Bill Clinton and Lynch. The whole like character became more and more confusing. And then back in October, they started to release an archive containing more than 300 domains and more than 300 IPs of actual targets from the Equation Group, so including some timestamp from 2000 to 2010. A lot of them were Solaris exploits, but so far they didn't release any like tools related to Solaris. And we noticed a lot of names of potential targets where some of them were still unknown, but from the domain name we would see like most of the country, like from China, Iran, Europe, and also like the tools name, but same thing. Most of them were still unknown at that time. And then back in December, they're like coming back with a more structured auction, where basically they offered the opportunity to their potential like customers to buy item per item. So the price range varied from 10 to 100 Bitcoin, which seemed more reasonable. Included one file like signed from September, which is kind of like showing that they were orchestrating most of their release. And we started to see like some names of the tools that were for auction. So December, most of them were like Unix tools, but in January, and that one kind of went a bit under the radar, they published another message called Windows Wires. So most of you probably recognize the name of Eternal Blue, Eternal Romance, Eternal Synergy, because those exploits have been leaked a few months later and reused by some of the ransomware, including WannaCry and including First Bunch. So back then, the only thing we knew is they claim to have like some SMB remote code execution. We don't know more about it. And there is some tool called First Bench. We ended up being like the Metasploit equivalent of Equation Group. And it was, if you wanted to buy everything, they give you like a special discount of 750 Bitcoin. A few days later, so like, oh, we're just leaving the industry, nobody cares. So they're expressing disappointment again. Everybody's like getting really confused, they're like, what's going on with those guys? And then they go silent for a while. Funny enough, so back in February, before the February Tuesday patch, a security researcher called Laurent Gaffier dropped an SMB v3 exploit on GitHub. He was like, I mean, like Laurent has an history of like breaking SMB for like many years now, so that was just one more. But given it was affecting like recent version of Windows, a lot of us expected that it was the actual reason for Microsoft to delay that Tuesday patch, because in February nothing happened regarding Tuesday patch until March. And back in March, Microsoft patched those Microsoft bugs. But back then, we didn't know why. We just expected it was because of Laurent, correct? But during that time frame, so bugs related to those previous exploits, Eternal Blue, Eternal Champion, or the Eternal exploits exploiting SMB, also have been patched. Because 1 month later, so basically 2 months after Laurent dropped that tweet about the SMB exploit, shadow brokers released the password of the initial archive from August. April was a really busy month. So they dropped like the password and everybody was like, oh, let's look at it. And then we started to see like all those Solaris exploits, anti-forensic tools, remote code execution for web mail servers, FTP servers, a framework also like a lot of like anti-forensic like utility to erase logs. So, and including like and something which has not been mentioned much so far is like all those remote code execution for Solaris, because so far a lot of attention had been given to the Windows exploits because of the ransomwares. So obviously if your background is becoming like red and says, oh, like send that money there, you will know that you have been targeted. But if it's like a Solaris exploit, no one is going to write a ransomware for it, so you probably will not have any idea of that. And interestingly enough, some extract of operational notes also got released here, mainly for mobile operators. So one of them, Silkstar, the name was disclosed in the document, but there is also a whole list of code names of targets, because like tools have like code names, but also like targets also have been disclosed, 11 of them. So it implies that 11 mobile operators across the globe have been targeted by Equation Group. And along that, some local privilege escalation for Linux and X system have been also released. So that was like at the beginning of the month of April. And then like another like random blog post got published about people complaining about the Borat style English that they regularly use every time they're publishing a blog post. And they claim that the reason they use a broken English is not because they're Russian, like people were like saying, but because they're an actual contractor for the US government. So they're like using that as part of OPSEC. God knows, like we still have no idea, but that was an interesting comment back then. And then 1 week later, the files from the Windows Virus issue that got teased back in January got dropped, and then people started to go crazy. It was like a panic all over, like for the rest of the months of April. Everybody was like, wow, like those tools are actually working with Windows, are like working remotely properly. Windows 7 is affected, Windows XP is affected. So a lot of the community on Twitter was analyzing those tools, and it was pretty much like a joint effort from the security community regarding like those tools, and First Bunch, which is like the Metasploit equivalent, and also a tool called like Pass-Freely got also released to like bypass authentication in Oracle servers. A third archive was also like published to build like implant. It contained a tool called Oddjob, and then another archive called like Swift got released. So that one was pretty interesting because the actual like Swift archive was pretty big, and it contained some tools, but mainly like operational notes regarding what happened to one of the Swift service bureau in Middle East. And it was extremely detailed. It contained most of the modus operandi, the name of the tools, and from that moment, it's kind of when the narrative of like the shadow brokers kind of like changed, where among those documents, you would see like PowerPoints with like a detailed plan of what happened, but among a lot of those documents, like the metadata files, metadata information of those files were still present, so a lot of the analyst names were also like leaked during that time, which is quite problematic, and also hard to believe that the most powerful intelligence agency in the world is not doing any OPSEC in case like files would be leaked, and they're just like using their real name when they're like registering like Microsoft Office. I mean, I don't know, but that was quite a significant one. It also includes like a SQL script that enables to dump like Swift messages from the actual Oracle database. So that dump basically contains all the different tools that Equation Group used to target that Swift bureau, but also a detailed like operation plan, like the map of the actual network. Like they probably knew the network even better than the actual employees of the company. So Pass-Freely, like I was mentioning before, was an implant that was injected remotely using the double pulsar backdoor. So most of you are probably familiar with double pulsar now, since WannaCry was also like leveraging it, where you can like do like some DLL injection directly from kernel mode. It was supporting more than 300 variants of Oracle, and it would like patch the authentication routine in memory. And here's like an extract of that SQL file that was used to dump the messages from the Oracle database. So it's basically like a SQL script, so very standard, but it gives a lot of insight on how like a Swift service bureau is working. Personally, before that, I had no idea what a Swift service bureau was using or running. So you can expect that criminals also learn a lot from it. And then WannaCry happened 1 month later, people are like, wow, what's going on here? Like, companies are being targeted like everywhere in Japan, in the US, in Europe, in Brazil. Like, it's spreading really fast. Some hospitals got down, like NHS was one of the first companies to be hit. A few kill switch got like registered. And then within like a few hours, we recognized that the actual way the malware was spreading was over SMB, so it was scanning the local network and external network. So that's why it spread a lot. So that's the data we have from one of our kill switch. Until now, we stopped like more than 1 million infection, so it's still active as you can see now. And after that, given the WannaCry media attention, shadow brokers came back, claiming they're going to come back with a new formula, saying they're going to release stuff every month as a wine of the month service which is what I've subtitled Cyber Fear as a Service. They are promising to give like more data on routers, Windows 10, more operationals on like central bank, SWIFT providers, but also like compromised network data on Iran, China, Russia. So people started to be like, wow, is it true, or are they just bluffing? So in June came the first edition of the Wine of the Month series of blog posts from shadow brokers. They started with 100 Zcash, and then a few days later they came back, weirdly enough, with an alternative using Monero for like 500. They're not providing any guarantee on what will be released. They're even saying it themselves. It may be or may not be interesting. And then June, a few weeks later, NotPetya happened. It was primarily targeting Ukraine. After doing some research on it, so the initial vector was like a rogue update, but then once the actual malware was being dropped, unlike WannaCry, it was only scanning the local network. So same thing, a lot of like attention around that, and it brought like the light also on shadow brokers because they're like the initial source of those files. Then they raised the price of the auction. Then like 1 month ago, they responded to some Twitter trolls. Then for the first time, we heard of a client who was one of the actual customer was saying he was not happy, he only released like he only received one file. But the thing about it, so that user, F Your Mom, basically claimed that he received only one file, he paid in Monero, but the thing is, well, to receive like a file from Tutanota on an external domain, well, you will need to exchange a key before that, and no instruction regarding that had been disclosed before. So it looks like really strange because as a customer, if you would expect to receive files over email from a Tutanota email address, if you're not on the same domain, well, you would have to provide either password to the shadow brokers, or they would have to give you a password, but no evidence of that had been actually like published so far. So today, so like 6 hours ago, like this morning, they also came back with another blog post where they're basically giving the new rules for the August release. So they're following a pattern where like the price keeps doubling. And it also like emphasized on the fact that there is no real guarantees that they have like more files, because so far we only have one email where one guy received one file, but he didn't publish it. So we still don't know if that's true, if it was an attempt to maintain their credibility. And so they're doing a mention of that, saying that someone published a screenshot of it, but nobody talked about June. If you even read the comment this morning, everybody is like, oh, very interesting, good post, but they're not saying much. So it almost looked like they used like a bot to post on it. So just to like try to wrap up, when it comes to like cyber weapons, it kind of shows that the West arrangement is not doing much. When you have like people like shadow brokers just arriving and start insulting everybody and dropping tools on operational nodes, who is responsible? That's still a big question. I personally think it's a shared responsibility between vendors, companies, and intelligence agency. They haven't like said anything public yet. But when it comes to vendors, like Microsoft has been extremely responsive when it comes to like the patching and also like security mitigations. Even now, they started to like disclose like more security mitigation for like Redstone free on Windows, which was pretty cool. And those actual vulnerabilities also got patched 1 month before, which was pretty good. But a lot of those companies being victim, the prime victims are often like small businesses, like we saw with WannaCry and NotPetya. And it shows like how sophisticated attacks are now. And it's kind of worrying to see the rising threat from some unreliable intelligence community agency. employees. That's it.